The steady hiss of a ventilator doesn't sound like a machine. It sounds like someone dragging a wet lung over gravel. Victor stood in the doorway of room 412, staring at the woman who polished his floors, realizing the blood on her wasn't a tragic accident. It was his fault. Hospitals smell like fear, covered up by industrial ammonia. Victor hated that smell. It clung to the wool of his custom-tailored suit, seeping into the lining where he kept a slim, cold automatic weapon pressing against his ribs. He stood just inside the threshold of the intensive care unit, perfectly still. The linoleum floor was scuffed with the black rubber marks of shoes that had pivoted too fast, run too hard. He didn't belong here. He knew it. The nurses at the central station knew it, casting nervous sidelong glances at the broad-shouldered man with ink creeping up past his collar and eyes that looked like dead flat iron. He was a man who put people in rooms like this. He wasn't supposed to be the one visiting them, yet here he was. In the bed lay Maya. She was a W-2 employee. That was what Victor kept telling himself as his jaw tightened, the muscle ticking under his skin. She was paid $30 an hour to dust the glass tables of his penthouse, sweep the imported hardwood, and pretend not to notice the duffel bags of cash or the occasional splintered tooth left on the rug. Right now, she didn't look like the woman who played old, crackling Lauryn Hill tracks through cheap wired earbuds while she aggressively scrubbed his kitchen grout. She looked small, stripped of the vibrant defensive energy she wore like armor. Maya was swallowed by the sterile white sheets. Her deep brown skin looked ashen under the brutal, buzzing fluorescent lights. A massive, purpling bruise covered the left side of her face, swelling her eye completely shut. The skin there was tight, shiny, and grotesque, colored like a crushed eggplant. A thick plastic tube was shoved down her throat, taped securely to her jaw, forcing her chest to rise and fall in a rigid, unnatural rhythm. Hiss, click, sigh. Victor moved closer. His leather shoes squeaked softly on the floor. It was a pathetic, vulnerable sound. He hated it. He stopped at the foot of the bed and gripped the thick plastic railing. The metal was cold. It grounded him slightly, stopping the low-grade tremor that had been building in his right hand since he got the phone call. A hit and run, the police had called it. Victor knew better. You don't run a sprawling, brutal syndicate in the city without knowing the weight of a message. The black SUV hadn't swerved by accident. It had waited outside the service entrance of his building. It had waited for her. They couldn't get to him through his armored cars and armed guards. So they went for the softest target in his orbit. A civilian. A black woman who took the downtown bus at 6 o'clock every evening with a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. He let go of the rail and reached out, his knuckles brushing the cheap, scratchy cotton of her hospital blanket. He didn't touch her skin. That felt too intimate, too much of a violation of the unspoken boundary they had maintained for 3 years. He remembered a Tuesday, about 4 months ago. He had come home at dawn, dragging his feet, a shallow knife wound leaking sluggishly through his dress shirt. Maya had been there early to clean before a dinner party. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't dropped her spray bottle. She just looked at the blood, looked at him, and walked into the bathroom. She came back with hydrogen peroxide, a stack of clean white towels, and a glass of ice water. "Sit," she had said. Her voice was slightly raspy, heavily accented by the South Side, flat and entirely unimpressed by his underworld status. She had cleaned the wound in silence. The smell of her cocoa butter lotion had mixed with the sharp tang of his blood and the chemical bite of the peroxide. When she finished, she threw the bloody towels in a trash bag, tied it off, and went back to scrubbing the stove. She never asked who did it. She never asked what he was going to do about it. She just fixed the mess and carried on. She was the only clean thing in his life. The only person who didn't want his money, fear his name, or plot his downfall. She just wanted the countertops to shine. And now, because of him, there was a machine breathing for her. "Sir?" Victor didn't turn. The voice belonged to a doctor. Young, tired, smelling of stale coffee and hand sanitizer. "Her status," Victor said. His voice was a low rasp, stripped of any polite inflection. "Your family?" the doctor asked, hesitating. Victor slowly turned his head. His eyes met the doctor's. The younger man swallowed hard and took a half step back. "Right. She has severe cranial swelling, a subarachnoid hemorrhage, 4 broken ribs on the left side, one of which punctured her lung. That's why she's intubated. We had to relieve the pressure in her chest cavity. Her left femur is fractured in 3 places." The words were clinical, dry, and they slammed into Victor's chest like a bag of wet cement. "Will she wake up?" Victor asked. "The next 48 hours are critical. The brain swelling needs to recede. We've induced a coma to give her body a chance to repair, but—" The doctor trailed off, looking at his clipboard. "It was a severe impact. The fact that she survived the initial trauma is a miracle. But the brain is unpredictable." Victor turned back to Maya. He stared at the pulse monitor, a jagged green line dancing across a black screen. It was frail. So goddamn frail. "Keep her alive," Victor said softly. "Whatever it costs. Whatever machines you need to buy. Whatever specialists you need to fly in. You bill it to me." "Sir, hospital policy—" Victor finally turned completely, stepping into the doctor's personal space. The height difference wasn't massive, but the gravity of Victor's presence sucked the air out of the room. "Policy is a suggestion. Keep her alive. If she dies because you lacked a piece of equipment, or because a surgeon was off shift, I will hold you personally accountable. Do you understand?" The doctor paled, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes." Victor looked at Maya one last time. He wanted to say something, an apology, a promise, but the words felt stupid and hollow in his mouth. He wasn't a hero. He was a monster who had dragged a bystander into his swamp. He turned and walked out, the sticky squeak of his shoes sounding like a countdown. The transition from the hyper-sterilized chill of the hospital to the humid, garbage-choked air of the city street felt like walking into a damp sponge. It was just past midnight. A light drizzle had started to fall, slicking the pavement and casting neon reflections from the street lights into the puddles. Victor stood by his idling town car. His enforcer, Thomas, was leaning against the rear door, smoking a cigarette under an umbrella. Thomas was a large man, built like a brick wall in a cheap suit, practical and entirely devoid of sentimentality. "How is she?" Thomas asked, flicking an ash onto the wet pavement. "Machines are doing the breathing," Victor said. He popped the collar of his coat against the damp wind. "The swelling in her brain is bad." Thomas nodded slowly. "It's a shame. She made good coffee. We'll have HR set up a new cleaning service for the penthouse by tomorrow afternoon. Better screen them tighter this time." Victor stopped. He didn't look at Thomas. He just stood entirely still in the rain, letting the cold droplets hit his face. The casual dismissal in Thomas's voice wasn't malicious. It was just the reality of their world. Maids are replaced. Cars are replaced. Soldiers are replaced. But Victor felt something hot and ugly coil in his gut. a sudden blinding pressure behind his eyes. Before Thomas could take another drag of his cigarette, Victor moved. It wasn't a calculated martial arts strike. It was raw, unadulterated violence. Victor's fist swung up in a brutal arc, the heavy gold ring on his middle finger connecting dead center with Thomas's jaw. There was a sickening crack, like stepping heavily on a dry branch. Thomas stumbled back, shock widening his eyes, his umbrella clattering to the ground. He hit the side of the car, spitting a mouthful of blood and half a molar onto the wet asphalt. He didn't reach for his gun. He just pressed a massive hand to his rapidly swelling face, looking at his boss in utter bewilderment. "Boss," Thomas mumbled, his jaw already shifting out of alignment. Victor stepped into him, grabbing the lapels of Thomas's suit and slamming him back against the reinforced glass of the car window. Victor's breathing was ragged, his chest heaving. His knuckles throbbed, a dull, fiery ache spreading up his forearm. "Don't ever," Victor hissed, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. "Talk about replacing her like she's a broken toaster. You understand me?" "Yes," Thomas choked out, blood leaking down his chin. "Yes, boss." Victor stared into Thomas's eyes for a long, vibrating second, searching for any hint of defiance. Finding none, he let go, disgusted with himself. His hands were shaking. He shoved them deep into his coat pockets. This wasn't him. He was losing his grip, unraveling over a civilian, over a maid. But the smell of the hospital was still in his nose, and the sound of that ventilator was still ticking in his ears. "The SUV," Victor said, his voice dropping back to a terrifying, deadpan calm. "Who drove it?" Thomas wiped his mouth with the back of a thick hand, wincing. "It was the Rossi crew. We got a partial plate from a traffic cam 2 blocks away. Registered to a shell company they use for their low-level runners. A kid named Leo. Hangs out at that dingy pool hall down in the industrial district." "Get the car," Victor said. The ride to the industrial district was completely silent. The rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers felt too loud. Victor stared out the window at the blurred city lights. He felt exhausted. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. For years, he had operated on logic, action and reaction, threat and neutralization. But this felt messy. This felt like grief, and he didn't know how to process it. He kept seeing the jar of expensive organic honey Maya had bought for him last week. "Your throat sounds like sandpaper, Mr. Victor." "Drink some tea," she had muttered, leaving the jar on the counter. He hadn't asked her to do that. It wasn't in her job description to care if his throat hurt. The car pulled up to a grimy, windowless brick building. The neon sign outside flickered and buzzed, half the letters burned out. The smell of cheap beer, stale urine, and wet asphalt hung heavy in the alley. Victor stepped out into the rain. Thomas flanked him, a silent, bleeding shadow. Victor kicked the heavy metal door open. It slammed against the interior wall with a noise like a gunshot. The music inside, a thumping, bass-heavy track, abruptly cut off as the bartender scrambled for the switch. There were maybe 10 people inside. Low-level thugs, drug runners, the scum that floated at the bottom of the city's barrel. "Leo," Victor said. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The silence in the room amplified his voice. A skinny kid in the back booth, wearing an oversized hoodie and an expression of sudden, absolute terror, bolted. He scrambled over the peeling vinyl of the booth and made a frantic dash toward the fire exit. Victor didn't run. He walked. Thomas intercepted the kid, throwing a massive arm across his chest like a clothesline. Leo hit the dirty floor hard. the breath blasting out of his lungs in a wheeze. Before he could scramble away, Victor was standing over him. The kid looked up, his eyes wide, scrambled, and dilated. He was maybe 22. Just a kid trying to earn a patch by running an errand for the Rossi family. I didn't know, Leo stammered, holding his hands up, pressing his back into the sticky floor. They just told me to drive. They said to hit the girl, send a message. I swear to God, man, I didn't know who she was. Victor looked down at him. He felt nothing. No righteous anger, no cinematic thrill of vengeance. He just felt an overwhelming, crushing weight. Victor knelt, ignoring the spilled beer soaking into his wool trousers. He grabbed the front of Leo's hoodie, pulling the kid half off the ground so their faces were inches apart. He could smell the sour stench of fear and cheap weed on the kid's breath. You hit her, Victor said, his voice a soft, vibrating hum. I'm sorry. I'll pay. I'll do whatever, just... Victor didn't let him finish. He brought his free hand down, driving a short, brutal punch into the side of the kid's knee. The kneecap gave way with a sickening pop. Leo screamed, a high, reedy sound that tore at the throat. He thrashed, grabbing at his leg, tears and snot instantly mingling on his face. You don't apologize, Victor whispered, his face an inch from Leo's ear. You don't get to be sorry. He stood up, looking at the writhing boy on the floor. It didn't fix anything. Maya's chest was still rising and falling because a machine forced it to. The bruise on her face wouldn't fade because this kid was screaming. Vengeance was a lie sold by movies to make grief look productive. Victor felt hollow. He looked at Thomas. Find out who gave him the order. The middleman, the boss, everyone in the chain of command. Thomas nodded, gripping his swollen jaw. And then, Victor looked at his knuckles. The skin was split, a thin line of red welling up. He wiped it on his coat. And then, Victor said, turning toward the exit, the damp night air rushing in to meet him, we burned the Rossi family to the ground. The smell of a burning warehouse is complicated. It isn't just wood smoke. It's melting copper wiring, scorching drywall, and the sickeningly sweet odor of burning plastic wrapped around imported textiles. Victor stood in the center of it all, a heavy, bruised silhouette against the orange glow of the flames. It had taken 72 hours to dismantle the Rossi family. 3 days of systematic, exhausting violence. Victor hadn't slept. His tailored suit was ruined, heavy with dried rain, drywall dust, and dark, tacky splatters that he refused to look at too closely. The knuckles of his right hand were wrapped in cheap white athletic tape, already stained brown. He stepped over the shattered glass of a skylight, his boots grinding the shards into the concrete. Across the vast, smoke-filled room, Dominic Rossi was backed against a loading bay door. Dominic was an older man who fancied himself a traditionalist, wearing cashmere coats and carrying a silver money clip. Right now, he was just an old man bleeding from a gunshot wound to the shoulder, panting heavily, clutching his ruined arm. 2 of Victor's men, including a heavily bruised Thomas, stood by the exits, rifles hanging off their tactical slings. They didn't need to aim. The fight was over. Victor stopped 10 feet from Dominic. The heat of the fire licked at the back of his neck, making the sweat sting his eyes. Over a Maid, Dominic wheezed, sliding slowly down the corrugated metal door until he hit the floor. He let out a wet, rattling laugh that ended in a cough of blood. You tore up the treaty. You burned 3 drop houses. You killed 7 of my boys. Over a girl who cleans your toilets. You're insane, Victor. You've lost your goddamn mind. Victor stared at him. He felt the heavy, cold weight of his pistol in his hand. He didn't raise it. Not yet. She wasn't in the game, Dominic, Victor said. His voice was a rasp, wrecked by smoke and fatigue. There are no civilians when you run the city, Dominic spat, his face pale and shining with cold sweat. You think you get to sit in your penthouse and pretend your hands are clean? We needed leverage on the docks. You weren't returning my calls. We tapped the closest thing you had to a routine. It's business. It's just math. Math. Victor looked at the old man, seeing the absolute conviction in his eyes. Dominic truly believed the world operated on a ledger. Blood in, money out. Collateral damage was just a tax you paid for doing business. And the terrifying truth was, a week ago, Victor would have agreed with him. He had lived by that exact same sociopathic math for a decade. He had ordered hits, seized territory, and never once thought about the mothers, the wives, or the people caught in the crossfire. He had been exactly like Dominic, a monster in a nice suit, convinced his rules made him civilized. But Dominic hadn't stood in room 412. Dominic hadn't heard the unnatural mechanical hiss of a machine, doing the breathing for a woman who just wanted to listen to Lauryn Hill and go home to her apartment. She brought me honey when my throat hurt, Victor said quietly. The words felt bizarre, entirely out of place in a burning warehouse surrounded by corpses. Dominic blinked, confusion momentarily overpowering his pain. What? What the hell are you talking about? She noticed things, Victor continued, looking past Dominic, staring at the embers floating in the air like dirty snow. I pay her to clean. I don't pay her to care. But she did. She treated me like a human being. And you put her in a coma to negotiate shipping lanes. Victor, listen to me. I don't want the docks, Dominic. I don't want the shipping lanes. Victor raised the pistol. The movement was slow, heavy, devoid of any theatrical flair. Wait, we can restructure? Dominic scrambled back, his boots slipping on his own blood. I have offshore accounts. I can give you the keys to the port. The math is broken, Victor said. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, a sharp, concussive crack that snapped the tension in the room instantly. Dominic slumped over, his cashmere coat soaking up the dark stain spreading across his chest. Victor lowered the gun. His ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the crackle of the fire. He waited for the catharsis. He waited for the profound sense of justice that was supposed to wash over him. Nothing came. He didn't feel vindicated. He just felt dirty. The smell of the gunshot residue mixed with the ash in his nose, bitter and toxic. He looked down at his trembling hand. Killing Dominic Rossi hadn't healed Maya's broken ribs. It hadn't reduced the swelling in her brain. It was just more blood on a pile that was already too high. "Boss!" Thomas called out over the roar of the flames, stepping forward through the smoke. "Sirens! We need to move!" Victor holstered the weapon. He turned away from the body, the ashes crunching under his boots. "Call the hospital," Victor said, walking toward the exit. "Tell them I'm coming back." The harsh artificial daylight of room 412 hadn't changed, but the terrifying hiss of the ventilator was gone. Victor sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, rolling up the sleeves of a stiff white shirt to expose his dark, sprawling ink. He smelled like stale hospital soap, dried sweat, and faint smoke. Maya lay still. The thick plastic tube was replaced by a simple nasal cannula, delivering a quiet stream of oxygen. Her bruised face had faded from a shiny purple to a mottled, sickly yellow. 2 days ago, they had brought her out of the induced coma. For 48 hours, she had drifted in a heavy narcotic fog. Victor stared at her hand resting on the scratchy blanket. Short, unpainted nails, an IV taped to her wrist. He wanted to hold it, the urge a hollow physical ache in his ribs. But he kept his fingers locked together. His world was poison. He had infected her enough. A soft, raspy sound broke the silence. Victor snapped his head up. Maya's eyes were open. The right one blinked slowly against the glare. The left remained a swollen slit. She looked around in groggy confusion before her gaze drifted and landed on him. Victor froze. The man who had spent 3 days burning a rival syndicate to ash suddenly couldn't draw a breath. He waited for her to see his taped knuckles and scream. Instead, her cracked lips parted. "You look like hell," she whispered. Her voice sounded like crushed glass. Victor let out a broken sound, half laugh, half sob. "I look like hell? Maya, you got hit by a truck." "SUV," she corrected weakly. "Black. Tinted windows. Didn't even slow down." She studied his battered hands. 3 years of ignoring duffel bags of cash in his penthouse meant she knew exactly what his knuckles meant right now. "Did you do it?" "Yes." "Who?" "The people trying to hurt me. They thought you were a weak point." Victor swallowed a knot of ash. "I'm sorry. This is my fault." Maya stared at the acoustic ceiling tiles, taking a slow, painful breath. Victor braced himself. He waited for her to quit, to threaten the police. He would give her millions to keep her safe. "My rent is due on the 1st, she mumbled. Victor blinked. "What?" "My rent, and my cat needs to be fed." She rolled her head back, her good eye pinning him down. "I'm missing 3 weeks of work. You gonna cover my shifts, Mr. Victor?" The grounded absurdity of the question hit him like a physical blow. He had been drowning in mafia melodrama. Maya was worrying about a stray cat. It broke him. The icy wall Victor had maintained for 10 years shattered. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking in a silent, agonizing fracture. The crushing weight of the violence, the isolation, and almost losing the only real thing in his life, finally caved in. Maya watched him. She was in too much pain to be a saint. But watching this terrifying man break down over a plastic hospital chair, she realized he was just as trapped as she was. "Hey," she rasped. Victor lifted his head, wiping his face with his wrist. "You're paying my medical bills," she said. "Every dime," Victor said rawly. "I'm setting up a trust. I'll buy you a house wherever you want. You never have to see me again." Maya listened to the steady beep of the monitor. "I like my apartment," she whispered, "and I like the city." "Maya, it isn't safe." "I'm not safe." "Then fix it," she said simply. She closed her eyes. "Fix it, Victor. I'm not running away just because you made a mess." He sat frozen as her breathing evened out. "Fix it." She hadn't called him Mr. Victor. He looked at the door. He couldn't protect her by burning down rival families. If he wanted to stay in the same room without being a poison, he couldn't be the boss anymore. Victor pulled out his cracked phone and dialed. "Boss?" Thomas answered, sounding exhausted. "Call the captains," Victor said quietly, eyes fixed on Maya's sleeping face. "Set up a meeting." "To divide the Rossi territory?" "No," Victor said, his fingertips finely, gently brushing the edge of her blanket. "To start liquidating ours. We're getting out. Sometimes real strength isn't about the empires we build, but the ones we are willing to tear down to protect the people who see us for who we truly are. If Victor and Maya's messy, raw journey hit you right in the chest, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves grounded, intense drama, and don't forget to subscribe. so you never miss our next deep dive into the shadows. Stay human, everyone.